Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today, we are unpacking what might be, honestly, the most cryptic source material we have ever received. We are going to look at a 22-word text that promises to explain the ultimate cosmic battle between good and evil.
But instead it just delivers what looks like a complete algorithmic meltdown.
Right, exactly. And we are going to figure out why this bizarre, repetitive string of text forces you to confront your own deep-seated need to find meaning. We are going to heavily explore how this ties into massive concepts of God and atheism and why human beings try to find structure in absolute chaos. And hey, real quick, before we jump into the data, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. So, to set the stage here, the source itself is fascinating.
It really is. We are looking at a transcript from a channel called Detective Data, and when you hear that name, you immediately assume a very rigorous empirical approach to things.
Yeah, you picture someone illuminated by the glow of spreadsheets hunting for anomalies, finding the hard, quantifiable facts hidden in the noise.
Right, the name sets a baseline of trust. It tells you that the information about to be presented has been filtered and analyzed. It prepares your brain to receive actual data.
Which makes the title of this specific video so incredibly jarring. I am going to read it exactly as it was provided to us. It is called God versus Satan in Blank Religion. There is a literal blank space, an underscore line, right in the middle of the title.
And that intentional omission is arguably the most important piece of data we have going into this. In textual analysis, a deliberate blank space is often louder than any capitalized word.
Because if we are talking about God versus Satan, which is a dualistic concept that spans millennia of human thought, why leave the specific religion blank?
Exactly. It implies that this foundational conflict transcends any specific dogma.
Or it questions whether the framework of religion is even necessary to discuss it at all. When I look at that blank space, I don't just see a fill-in-the-blank test for your personal faith. I see an opening for a purely secular or even an atheistic interpretation.
Oh, absolutely. If you leave it blank, you strip away the cathedrals, the mosques, the temples. You are just left with the raw concepts of creation and destruction.
Right. From an atheistic perspective, it suggests that the core conflict is just universal, perhaps even a metaphor for the natural laws of the universe. It invites you to consider that the labels we put on good and evil are just human constructs, just stories overlaid onto something much more primal.
That is a critical lens to apply here, especially as we look at the text itself.
Yeah, so you sit back ready for this sweeping, epic, maybe slightly controversial breakdown of comparative theology and atheistic philosophy, and then we get the actual text. When I first pulled up this transcript, I honestly thought my screen was glitching.
It is quite the shift in expectations.
Brace yourself, because I am going to read the entire 22-word text to you right now, exactly as it is written.
Here it is.
Heat, 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 heat.
The sheer starkness of it is startling.
I was in a state of amused shock. You prepare yourself for an academic thesis, and instead you get a broken record. But our mission today is to treat this exactly as it presents itself, as a serious piece of detective data.
We have 22 words. We need to figure out why this matters to you.
So let's unpack the theology, or rather the physics of that specific word. Out of the entire English language, why reduce the entire conflict of God versus Satan to just heat?
If we look across major religious traditions, heat is foundational. When we discuss dualities like good and evil, salvation and damnation, extreme temperature is frequently the metric used to describe the ultimate reality.
Right. Satan's domain is traditionally associated with consuming, destructive, agonizing fire.
But conversely, God is frequently depicted as a purifying fire or divine light. The seraphim, the highest angelic choir, literally translates to the burning ones. So both sides of this cosmic battle are characterized by absolute heat.
That makes perfect sense from a theological standpoint, but let's look at it through that atheistic lens we brought up earlier. If we strip away the spiritual narrative, heat is just thermodynamics. It is entropy.
The heat death of the universe.
Exactly. The heat death of the universe is a genuine scientific theory about how everything ends. By reducing God versus Satan down to just heat, the transcript almost argues that our grand spiritual narratives are just primitive ways our ancestors tried to explain the brutal, indifferent physics of reality.
A universe that doesn't care about our morals but is simply burning or freezing.
Yeah, it connects perfectly to the physical sensation of the word itself. Think about it. When a human body is subjected to extreme heat, cognitive thought shuts down.
You stop philosophizing, you stop debating doctrine, you just feel the necessity of survival.
Right. The repetition in this transcript simulates that overwhelming nonverbal reality. It removes the intellectualism from existence and reduces it to a visceral state. Imagine walking into a massive echoing cathedral. You sit down looking up at the stained glass, expecting a multi-layered sermon on morality.
And the lights drop, and there's just one voice echoing from the altar.
Just whispering the word heat over and over. It takes all the complex debates about theology and atheism and collapses them into a single, terrifying physical sensation.
It is completely overwhelming. But we cannot forget that this is detective data. We have to look for the patterns embedded in the text. This isn't just a random scattering of words.
No, it isn't. When you map out the structural sequence of the transcript, a very deliberate progression emerges. I actually sat down and counted this out to make sure we had the exact sequence because it is not just a wall of identical text.
Let's walk through that data. It begins with a tight group of 3 lowercase heats. Then we get our first disruption, which is the word hey.
And that is immediately followed by a capitalized heat, which acts almost like a punctuation mark.
Exactly. Then the sequence resumes with a larger group of 5 lowercase heats.
Followed by another disruption, the solitary letter N.
Correct. And after that N, we hit a massive escalating block of 9 lowercase heats, and the entire transcript ends with the word hey, bookended by one final capitalized heat.
The mathematical progression of the lowercase words is what really catches my eye here. 3, then 5, then 9. It starts small, grows slightly, and then nearly doubles. It feels like a deliberate escalation.
If we view it as a sequence, the difference between 3 and 5 is 2. The difference between 5 and 9 is 4. It is an exponential curve.
So it implies that the cosmic temperature, whether that is this theological battle or just our physical reality, is not static. It is intensifying. Each wave is longer and more sustained than the last.
And then you have those capitalized versions of the word acting like spikes on a graph. A lowercase heat describes an environment, but a capitalized heat.
That implies a proper noun.
Right, an entity.
Right.
It is not just a temperature anymore. It is a presence manifesting in the room.
That is one way to look at it. But we also have to entertain the possibility that this is a literal data corruption. A microphone left on near a cooling, fan-catching room noise, and an AI auto-captioning algorithm desperately trying to make sense of the acoustic static.
See, I lean toward the glitch theory myself.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it is an AI hallucination, it is incredibly poetic that the machine defaults to the concept of temperature.
Yeah, the algorithm is experiencing the chaotic noise of its environment and can only output heat. It is almost a perfect metaphor for the atheistic worldview we discussed. The machine doesn't find God or Satan in the noise. It just finds raw physical energy.
But if it is just a machine glitching, how do you explain the outliers? Because the anomalies are what make this text so haunting.
The disruptions. Yeah, in this string of 22 words, we have 3 distinct breaks in the pattern. The word hey appearing twice, and that solitary letter N right in the middle.
Let's tackle the heys first. When you read this text aloud, the heys are completely jarring. In the middle of this oppressive chant of heat, suddenly you get a casual greeting.
To me, it sounds like a human voice trying to break through a solid wall of television static. The tone shift is profound. Hey is colloquial and fundamentally human.
If the endless heat represents the abstract, overwhelming reality of the universe, whether that is a divine battle or just the crushing weight of entropy, then hey is the voice of the mortal observer caught in the middle of it.
It is like waking up from a trance. You are being hypnotized by the environment and suddenly someone snaps their fingers. It reminds you that underneath all these grand cosmic theories about theology and atheism, there are just everyday people trying to navigate the temperature of their lives.
And notice the placement of those human interjections. The first hey happens very early, right after the first small grouping of 3. The observer notices the heat almost immediately.
But the final hey occurs at the very end, right after that massive, suffocating block of 9 heats. Right before the final capitalized heat drops like an anvil.
He goes from a casual observation to a desperate plea. Hey, it's getting warm, turns into, hey, I am burning.
It is the human element trying to assert its existence against an indifferent universe. Which brings us to the solitary letter N sitting right smack in the middle of the transcript. It follows the group of 5 and precedes the massive block of 9.
I know you have a highly analytical theory for this, but I have to push back a little first. Given that we are likely looking at an auto-generated transcript, isn't N just a phonetic misinterpretation of a transition word?
Like the word and.
Exactly. The AI hears a breath or a stutter and types heat and heat, but cuts off the word. It is a simple phonetic glitch.
The phonetic glitch is definitely the most technologically sound explanation. But if we evaluate this under the detective data mandate, we have to look at the mathematical implications. In algebraic sequences, n represents an unspecified number, a variable or an exponent. It often points toward infinity.
That is a fascinating leap. But does an AI transcription error know algebra?
The AI doesn't, but the curator of the data might. If we treat the transcript as a curated piece of minimalist art, dropping the variable n right in the middle of an escalating sequence changes the entire meaning.
It implies the pattern doesn't stop at 9. The variable n serves as a placeholder for infinity. The heat will continue multiplying to an infinite power, consuming the entire graph.
Okay, if we combine the human element with the math, the n could also be the beginning of the word no.
I like that.
Imagine a human consciousness experiencing this consuming theological or thermodynamic fire and trying to reject it. They try to shout no, but the word is literally smothered by the environment, leaving only the sharp consonant before the heat resumes.
It is a bleak interpretation, but it aligns perfectly with the cosmic scale of the title. The human voice tries to opt out of the duality, but the environment simply swallows it whole.
This brings us to the core of why we're even doing this deep dive today. We have to zoom out and look at the psychological Rorschach test we are participating in. Because let's be honest, this transcript is almost certainly a catastrophic technological failure.
An algorithm encountered audio. It couldn't parse maybe wind hitting a microphone or digital feedback, and it confidently hallucinated the word heat over and over again.
And yet, presented under the grandiose title, God versus Satan in blank religion, it transforms. The data itself is meaningless noise, but our reaction to it is deeply meaningful.
Think about what your brain is trying to do right now as you listen to this. When faced with an absolute lack of traditional information, the human mind refuses to accept the void. It desperately tries to project meaning onto the static.
We just took 22 repetitive words and built frameworks encompassing thermodynamics, comparative theology, atheistic philosophy, and mathematical infinity.
This phenomenon is called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections in unrelated or random data. It is the exact same cognitive mechanism that drives much of human philosophy and religion.
The contrast between that ambitious title promising answers about universal truth and the primal nonsensical output forces us to confront how we process the unknown.
It makes you realize how much of our worldview is just our brains taking an overwhelming, unexplainable experience of the universe and packaging it into neat narratives, titles, and rules.
When you strip the narrative away, what is actually left?
Just the raw data of existence. We expect complex rules on how to live our lives. We expect definitive answers about God and atheism, about good and evil. But this transcript denies you that comfort.
It hands you a sensory overload and challenges you to find your own footing. It highlights how quickly we scramble to build structure when the packaging of reality is taken away.
It really is a mirror. If you look at this transcript and see a profound meditation on hellfire that reveals a deeply ingrained theological background, if you look at it and see a mathematical progression toward infinity that reveals an empirical, data-driven mindset.
And if you look at it and see a hollow universe where the battle of God and Satan is just a human illusion masking the cold reality of entropy that reveals a secular existential lens.
The detective data isn't the text. The true data being collected is your personal interpretation of the text.
We started with what appeared to be an absolute joke, a broken string of words generated under a title with a literal blank space. But by treating the noise seriously, we mapped out mathematical escalations.
We heard the desperate hay of a human voice trapped in the static.
And we explored the tension between empirical logic and spiritual belief. We uncovered the innate human desire to project our own beliefs onto a chaotic universe. The title provided the frame, but human nature painted the canvas.
As we wrap up this exploration, we want to leave you with a final thought to take with you. Think back to that enigmatic title and that deliberate blank space. God versus Satan in blank religion.
If you had to personally fill in that blank today, based entirely on this overwhelming, inescapable experience of heat, what word would you choose?
Does the ultimate battle of good and evil eventually just become an indistinguishable, intense temperature stripping away all specific names and dogmas?
Or does the heat burn away the blank space entirely, leaving us to realize that the noise is just noise and the meaning is whatever we choose to build from it? Thank you for joining us on this incredibly unique deep dive into the absolute bare bones of meaning. We loved unpacking this void with you, and we cannot wait to see what kind of wild data you send our way next time. Until then, keep questioning the noise.